What would you do if your neighbor used your garage without asking, once, twice? What if she didn't even see it as wrong? For Ethan Clark, a quiet, hardworking black engineer living in a peaceful Colorado suburb, it started with a bird feeder, then a mailbox, a few friendly notices from the HOA. Harmless, right? But when his neighbor Janice Whitmore began parking in his carport without permission, then moved her car inside his closed garage, that's when the quiet man decided to push back. What followed wasn't just a neighborly dispute, it was a power play, an unraveling of control, a battle between entitlement and boundary. And Ethan, he didn't just fight back, he documented everything, every horn honk, every smile laced with control, every line that was crossed. This is the story of how one man turned HOA harassment into a reckoning, a tale of trespassing retaliation and a garage that became the front line of a bigger fight for privacy, for dignity, and for the right to say, "This is mine, and you don't get to take it." Stick around because what starts as a rainstorm ends in a full-blown uprising. Ethan Clark had always valued peace. That was the point of moving to Brookhaven Ridge, a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Denver where the lawns were tidy. The neighbors smiled politely and the mail always arrived on time. For Ethan, a 38-year-old black software engineer who worked from home, it was a haven of order and simplicity, a place where he could breathe. His house, a modest two-bedroom on a corner lot, was nothing fancy, but it was his. When he bought it 3 years ago, the previous owners had converted the garage into a bright home office. It had wide windows that let in the morning sun and enough space for a standing desk, a pair of monitors, and a coffee machine tucked in the corner. It wasn't just a place to work. It was his sanctuary. Most days, Ethan kept to himself. He wasn't unfriendly. He waved at passing neighbors, exchanged small talk with the mail carrier, and once helped an elderly couple fix a broken sprinkler head. But he was also aware, acutely so, that he was the only black homeowner on his street. Maybe the only one in the entire neighborhood. And while no one had ever said anything outright, there was always a subtle undertone. A glance held a little too long. A conversation that went quiet when he walked by. So he kept things neat. His lawn was always trimmed. The hedges stayed square. He brought in his trash bins on time, sometimes early. He didn't throw loud parties or leave holiday decorations up past New Year's. He tried to be what people like to call a good neighbor, even if that bar seemed higher for him than it was for others. For the most part, it worked. The HOA left him alone. The neighborhood was quiet. Life was predictable until Janice Whitmore moved in. She arrived in early spring just as the trees were beginning to bud. Mid-50s, perfectly pressed slacks, a pearl-white Lexus SUV with a license plate that read, "For Janice." Her handshake was firm, her smile tight. Within weeks, she'd joined the HOA board. Within 2 months, she was vice president. At first, Ethan didn't think much of it. People got involved in their communities all the time, but then came the notices. The first was about his potted succulents. Non-conforming front yard vegetation, it read in bold. He moved them to the backyard. Then came the complaint about his garbage bins being visible from the street for over 30 minutes after collection. He adjusted his schedule. Next was a polite warning about the color of his mailbox. Not neutral enough. He painted it a less controversial shade of beige. Each infraction came in a crisp white envelope placed carefully in his mailbox. Sometimes it was followed by a text message, occasionally a knock at the door, and always the same sweet tone from Janice. We all want to keep the neighborhood looking its best. Ethan, it's nothing personal. Maybe it wasn't. But Ethan was beginning to feel like for Janice everything was personal. And though he didn't know it yet, the succulents and garbage bins were just the beginning. It started to feel like the rules were shifting, but only for him. A week after repainting his mailbox, Ethan received another notice. This time it was about the small wooden bird feeder hanging from the oak tree in his backyard. The letter claimed it was attracting potentially disruptive wildlife. He read it twice, then looked out the window to see a single sparrow pecking at sunflower seeds. Disruptive. He sighed, folded the letter and tucked it into the growing stack on his kitchen counter right next to the one about the succulents and the trash bins. That evening, while Ethan was rinsing dishes, the doorbell rang. He peeked through the peephole. Janice Whitmore stood on the porch, lips tight in a practiced smile, clipboard in hand. He opened the door halfway. "Good evening." "Oh, hi there, Ethan," she chirped. "Just doing a little walkthrough. Wanted to follow up about that bird feeder, hope the notice didn't come across too harshly." You know how these forms are all official sounding. He gave a polite nod, resisting the urge to ask if she did these walkthroughs with every other neighbor. Janice continued undeterred. We've had some complaints from residents. Squirrels mostly. One neighbor swore she saw a raccoon the other night. And while we don't think it was your yard specifically, well, birds lead to seeds, seeds lead to critters. Right, Ethan said flatly. Makes sense. She stepped just a little closer, tilting her head like a schoolteacher talking to a distracted student. I'm sure you understand. We all have to keep things uniform. It's not just about your property. It's about the whole community image. These little things, they add up. It was the same phrase she used about his mailbox, about the succulents, about the bins, uniform image. Little things. Ethan forced a smile. I'll take care of it. Wonderful. She beamed as if they had just solved a shared problem. Then, without missing a beat, she added, Oh, and I noticed a couple packages sat on your porch all day yesterday. Just a friendly reminder to bring them in promptly. You never know what kind of people might be walking by. Her smile widened as if to soften the insinuation. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He didn't respond. Well, Janice said, stepping back. We all want to maintain standards here. I'm sure you understand. Ethan watched her disappear down the walkway, clipboard swinging at her side like a badge of authority. He closed the door quietly and leaned against it, exhaling. He'd lived in white spaces most of his adult life, college tech conferences, quiet neighborhoods like this one. He'd mastered the code switch, the calm demeanor, the overly polite emails. But this was different. It wasn't just about lawns or trash bins or bird feeders. It was about control. It was about being watched, not openly, never overtly, but always there, like the heat that lingers after a fire has died down. He returned to the kitchen, added the newest letter to the stack, and stared out at the tree where the feeder still swung gently in the breeze, just birds and seeds, he thought. But in this neighborhood, some things were never just anything. The notices had stopped, at least for now, but the silence felt loaded like the pause before a string snaps. Ethan couldn't shake the sense that he was being watched. Every time he stepped outside, took a call on his porch, or received a delivery, he felt the invisible weight of a gaze. He told himself not to be paranoid, but he knew the feeling too well. It was the quiet kind of scrutiny, the kind that came dressed in politeness but always hinted, "You're out of place." That week, he kept his head down and worked late. Janice hadn't shown up at his door again, but he noticed her Lexus cruising past his house slowly twice on Tuesday. Coincidence, maybe, but it didn't sit right. Then came Thursday. The rain had started before dawn, tapping softly at the windows and swelling by midday into a full downpour. Ethan had back-to-back meetings with clients in 3 time zones. He kept the blinds pulled and his focus sharp, trying not to let the tension of the past few weeks bleed into his work. He was midway through a presentation when a shrill, repetitive sound shattered his concentration. A car horn, again and again. Relentless. He glanced at the screen, muted his mic, and stood up. Through the side window of his home office, he spotted a white SUV idling under his carport. His chest sank, Janice umbrella in hand. Ethan stepped into the storm. Rain slapped against the concrete, the wind tossing droplets sideways. As he approached the carport, the honking finally stopped. Janice rolled her window down, barely enough to speak. Ethan, you need to move your car. I've been sitting out here getting soaked. He blinked, rain pattering against his umbrella. Excuse me, the street near my house is flooding, she said, exasperated. I didn't want to risk water getting into my car. Your carport was open. I assumed you wouldn't mind. Ethan looked past her. His car was as always parked in the converted garage. He'd left the carport clear earlier after unloading groceries. Temporarily empty, didn't mean up for grabs. I'm on a work call, he said, and this is my property. She narrowed her eyes. Well, I'm asking now. Just move your car and let me use the garage. The carport's barely covered. The rain's blowing in. The audacity caught him off guard. No, Janice, he said calmly. You can't just decide to park here. And you certainly can't use my garage, Janice scoffed. You're being very unreasonable. There should be emergency provisions for situations like this. I'll be speaking to the board. Without another word, she backed out, splashing through the growing puddles, her tires flinging water across Ethan's shoes. He stood there watching the SUV disappear down the street, the rain hissing around him. He didn't move for a while. Something had shifted. It wasn't just about community standards anymore. This wasn't about bird feeders or mailbox paint. It was about pushing, about testing how far she could go. and Ethan had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. 3 days passed without a word. No notices in the mailbox, no surprise knocks on the door, no Lexus idling out front. It was the kind of quiet that Ethan didn't trust, too complete, too intentional. He had returned to his routines, work, groceries, morning walks. But he found himself checking twice before stepping outside, scanning the sidewalk like he expected someone to emerge from a hedge with a clipboard. By Sunday afternoon, the rain had cleared and the skies were clean and blue. Ethan stopped by the grocery store, picked up a few things, and pulled into his driveway with a bag of oranges in the passenger seat. But something was off. The garage door was already open. That was strange. He'd locked it that morning, or at least he was sure he had. He parked in the driveway and stepped out cautiously, heart beating faster with each step toward the house. Inside the garage sat Janice's white Lexus SUV, front wheels neatly between the lines, as if it belonged there. He froze. His mind scrambled for a reason, a break-in, but there was no sign of damage, no forced entry, and then it clicked. Months ago, during a routine HOA inspection, Janice had requested access to inspect a supposed electrical hazard on the exterior of the converted garage. Ethan had given her the temporary code to the keypad so she wouldn't need to disturb him during work hours. He never thought she'd keep it, let alone use it. He stared at her vehicle in disbelief. No note on the windshield. No text. No call. Just entitlement. Rolled up on 4 wheels and parked neatly inside his space. Ethan closed the garage door with a click from his phone, locking the Lexus inside, then walked into the house without even unpacking the groceries. He opened the keypad's app and immediately changed the access code. Then he pulled open the circuit panel near the laundry room and disabled the emergency manual override. A small flick of the switch and Janice's access, both physical and symbolic, was gone. Only then did he text her. "Hi Janice, I just got home and found your vehicle in my garage. Please be aware that this is private property and the code you used was provided months ago for a single inspection purpose. The code has now been changed. We'll need to discuss this when you return." The reply came 12 minutes later. "Ethan, I assumed you wouldn't mind. My driveway is being resealed today, and with construction on Maple, I couldn't park on the street. Your garage was open, so I used it. Simple solution. No need to make this dramatic. No apology, no hint of embarrassment, just explanation wrapped in condescension." Ethan sat back in his chair, staring at the message. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't type. This wasn't just a violation of space, it was a violation of trust. She had crossed a line, not by accident, not out of desperation, but out of the belief that her convenience outweighed his consent. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the now closed garage door. The air felt heavier. This was no longer neighborhood politics. This was trespass, and it was personal. It didn't take long. At 4:13 p.m., less than 3 hours after Ethan had discovered Janice's Lexus in his garage, his phone buzzed with a new text message. "Ethan, I need my car. Please open the garage. I have somewhere I need to be." He didn't respond immediately. He needed time to think, to breathe, to keep himself from replying with the heat her message deserved. Instead, he waited. 15 minutes, then 30. At the 35-minute mark, the doorbell rang. Ethan checked the front porch camera feed. There she was. Janice Whitmore, standing with perfect posture, wearing a raincoat that hadn't seen a drop of rain and pacing back and forth like a teacher waiting to scold a late student. She was on her phone, gesturing with the kind of frustration that made it look like the whole world had inconvenienced her. He let her wait. At the 45-minute mark, he opened the door. "Ethan," she said sharply before he could even speak. "This is completely unacceptable. I've been waiting out here for almost an hour. I have an appointment. You've essentially held my vehicle hostage. I could call the police for this." Ethan leaned casually against the doorframe, unbothered. "For what exactly?" he asked. "For parking your car in my garage without permission. For using a private security code that wasn't meant for this kind of access." Janice crossed her arms. "It was raining. My driveway was closed. It was a temporary solution. You're blowing this way out of proportion. You entered my property without my consent." "Janice," Ethan said, his voice low and calm. "And not just the driveway, my garage. You didn't ask. You didn't notify me. You just assumed." She rolled her eyes. "Neighbors help each other. That's what communities are for." "Help," he replied, "is something you request, not something you take." There was a pause, tight and bristling with tension. Janice's jaw flexed, her lips pressed together. She looked like someone biting back everything she wanted to say. And for the first time, Ethan saw it. Not the HOA officer or the polite neighbor, but the entitlement beneath it. The disbelief that someone like him, a man she considered beneath her in unspoken ways, had drawn a line and refused to budge. Fine, she finally muttered through clenched teeth. I should have asked before parking in your garage. Are you satisfied now? Ethan studied her. The words were there, but the tone made them hollow. Still, it was something. He tapped his phone screen. From inside the garage, the soft mechanical hum of the door rising filled the air. Janice didn't thank him. She didn't look at him. She walked past heels, clicking against the pavement, climbed into her Lexus, and backed out with more speed than necessary. The SUV disappeared down the street without another word. Ethan watched the rain gutter drip beside his porch. The water falling felt cleaner than the conversation that had just taken place. As the garage door closed again, he exhaled. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't escalated, but the boundary had been drawn. And next time, he wouldn't just be holding the line, he'd be enforcing it. The morning after the standoff, Ethan woke to the sound of a soft thud at the front door. A delivery. No, it was too early. Mail, possibly. But deep down, he already knew what it was. He slipped on a hoodie, opened the door, and there it sat, neatly taped to the glass with precision. Only Janice could muster. A white envelope bearing the Brookhaven Ridge HOA letterhead. The subject line in bold capital letters. Non-compliant structural modification, action required. Ethan didn't even open it right away. He stared at it for a moment, letting the absurdity wash over him like cold air. He knew this wasn't about the garage. This was about control and payback. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and finally unfolded the letter. The language was formal, but the intent was unmistakable. According to HOA Code 6.14b, any structural modifications to garages must comply with neighborhood visual integrity standards. Your garage appears to be in violation of said standards. It must be restored to original functional form within 30 days to avoid fines. No mention of when the rule was introduced. No inspection date. No photographic evidence. Just a vague, retroactive claim. Ethan read it twice. Then he reached into his filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Property Purchase 3 years ago. Inside was everything. The garage conversion had been completed by the previous owners with full permits filed with both the city and the HOA. He had the stamped approvals, blueprints, and correspondence, each dated, scanned, and stored. He snapped a photo of the letter and forwarded it to Tanya Abrams, his longtime friend and real estate attorney. Her reply came within the hour. They can't do this. Retroactive enforcement of aesthetic standards isn't valid if the modification was previously approved. I'll draft a response. He exhaled, tension easing slightly from his shoulders. Still, he knew Janice wasn't acting on HOA policy. She was acting on ego, and now she was using the rules as a weapon. That night, Ethan pulled out a notebook. The cover was worn, the pages blank. He titled the first page, Brookhaven HOA Incident Log. Then he began writing bird feeder complaint, May 8th, verbal plus formal notice, mailbox color violation. May 12th, written unauthorized parking in garage, June 3, retaliation letter, June 4th, see attached. He printed screenshots of text messages, saved timestamps from his home security cameras, archived HOA emails into a separate folder. Every detail mattered now. He was done giving the benefit of the doubt. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore, it was a pattern, and patterns could be proved. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Sprinklers whispered over lawns, wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze. But Ethan knew better. The war in Brookhaven wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting matches or broken windows. It came in envelopes, in rules, in clipped smiles and weaponized pleasantries, and Ethan Clark was done playing defense. By midweek, Ethan had settled into a new kind of routine, part homeowner, part archivist. Each new email from the HOA was filed and labeled. Each camera clip was backed up twice. His garage remained off limits. The code changed, the override disabled, and the security camera repositioned to capture the door in full frame. He didn't expect Janice to back off, but he didn't expect her to double down either. That Friday afternoon, the sun was high and the breeze light. Rare calm for a Colorado summer. Ethan took advantage of the weather, pulling weeds from the flower beds near his porch. It felt good to work with his hands, to focus on something grounded and real. His phone sat in his pocket, music playing softly through his earbuds. He didn't hear the car until it was already halfway up his driveway. He looked up just in time to see Janice's Lexus glide beneath the open garage door. The sensors must have tripped when he'd wheeled the lawn tools inside earlier and forgot to close it. She didn't look his way. She didn't wave or ask. She simply parked, turned off the ignition, and stepped out with the casual grace of someone returning to her own property. No note, no excuse. Just bold, unapologetic entitlement. Ethan stood still, watching her walk away down the sidewalk toward what was likely another HOA meeting. She didn't even glance back. He felt the quiet heat rising in his chest. Not rage, not even shock, just certainty. She thought she could keep doing this. Not anymore. That evening, Ethan drove to the hardware store and returned with a heavy-duty hasp and industrial-grade padlock. He spent an hour installing the mechanism on the inside of the garage door, making sure it wouldn't interfere with the motor but would completely prevent the door from opening regardless of what code was entered. He tested it 3 times. Locked, secure, unbreakable from the outside. Then he made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and waited. At 8:12 p.m., Janice returned. He watched her walk up the driveway, confidently punch in the garage code, and stop. She tried again, and again. Then pulled out her phone. From the movement of her mouth and arms, it was clear she wasn't happy. Moments later, his doorbell rang. He counted to 30, then opened it. Janice stood with that forced smile stretched across her face, phone still in hand. "The garage door seems to be malfunctioning," she said sweetly. "I need to get my car." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Your car? In my garage." Again. She hesitated for a beat. "It was open. I figured it was okay, just for a few hours." "We've talked about this," he said, voice steady. "You entered my property without permission." Again. "This is no longer a misunderstanding, it's trespassing." "I don't have time for this," she snapped. "Just open the garage." Ethan didn't flinch. "I've secured it. It'll be unlocked at 9 tomorrow morning if, and only if, you're willing to acknowledge that what you did was wrong." Her face hardened. "You locked my car in your garage?" "I secured my garage from repeat violations," he replied. "We're not doing this again, Janice." She opened her mouth, then closed it, words caught in her throat. Ethan offered her the same calm smile she so often weaponized. "I'll see you tomorrow." And gently he closed the door. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Ethan opened his garage. He'd slept fine, not because he wasn't bothered, but because he knew the power of preparation. He had every text archived, every camera angle reviewed. The padlock was removed, but the boundaries it represented still stood. Janice arrived 10 minutes later, not alone. Trailing behind her were 2 other members of the HOA board. Tom Garvey, an older, even-tempered man in a tan windbreaker, and Linda Reyes, a quiet, newer resident who'd only recently been elected. Their presence was no accident. This was a calculated move. She wasn't just here to get her car. She was staging a performance. Ethan stepped onto his porch as the trio reached the driveway. "Good morning," he said evenly. Janice didn't return the greeting. Instead, she launched into her version of events like a prosecutor before a jury. "Tom, Linda," she said loudly, "I brought you here because we have a growing concern. There's been a pattern of unneighborly conduct, escalating hostility, locking up vehicles, creating unnecessary conflict. I thought it was best for all of us to witness this firsthand, so there are no further misunderstandings." Ethan said nothing for a moment. He just looked at her, then at the other 2 board members. Tom glanced between them, clearly trying to gauge the situation. "I thought we were here to help retrieve your car." "Janice." "You are," Janice replied quickly. "But there's a bigger issue here. Ethan's behavior is disruptive. He's turning minor disagreements into personal attacks. It affects the whole community." Ethan didn't flinch. He turned toward Tom and Linda. "Would you like to see the facts before making a decision?" Tom hesitated. "What do you mean?" Ethan held up a small binder. Inside were printed texts, emails, a copy of the retaliation letter about the garage conversion, and screenshots of the HOA approval dated 3 years prior. On top was a USB drive with footage from his home security system. "I've documented everything," Ethan said. "Every time Janice entered my property without permission, every violation notice that followed a disagreement, every time she used HOA resources to push a personal agenda. You'll also find the camera footage from yesterday showing her pulling into my garage without asking again." He handed the binder to Tom, who took it slowly. Janice looked visibly shaken, her confident posture wavering. "Ethan," Linda asked gently, Did you give her permission to use the garage this time? No. And she never asked. Janice interjected. It was open, I assumed. Tom held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He flipped through the binder, his brow furrowing. This isn't just a disagreement, he said slowly. This is a pattern. A serious one. Janice's smile had vanished. Her voice dropped. I was just trying to maintain standards, keep the neighborhood civil. Ethan met her eyes. There's nothing civil about abusing power. Linda nodded quietly, and even Janice seemed to realize the performance was falling apart. I think, Tom said after a pause, we need to have a board meeting, a real one. And soon, Ethan nodded. I'll be there. Janice didn't reply. She walked past him without another word, climbed into her Lexus, and drove off, silent now, but visibly shaken. Ethan watched her go, not with satisfaction but with resolve. This wasn't over. But for the first time, he wasn't the one under scrutiny, and the truth had finally started to speak louder than her smile. For the next 2 days, Brookhaven Ridge was quiet. Unnaturally so, Janice hadn't responded to the documents Ethan submitted. No email, no text, no surprise visits. But silence from someone like her wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Ethan stayed alert. He updated his logs, backed up his camera footage again, and spoke with Tanya, his lawyer, about the HOA's upcoming board meeting. Tom had promised transparency. Ethan was cautiously optimistic. Then came Saturday. Ethan had just returned from a short grocery run, reusable bags slung over one shoulder, when he spotted the unmistakable white Lexus. Not in his garage, but blocking it. Janice had parked perpendicular to the garage entrance, deliberately angled across the driveway. Not just close, not just inconvenient. Blockading, no note, no apology, just another silent message. I still control the space around you. Ethan stood motionless for a moment, the wind rustling through the trees as his bags hung from his hand. Then he walked calmly into the house, set the groceries on the counter, and dialed the non-emergency police line. While waiting, he called a local tow company and queued up the relevant security footage from his front camera, time-stamped clear as day. 23 minutes later, Officer Jenkins arrived, tall, composed, and attentive. Ethan greeted him with a firm handshake and a USB drive. She's been entering my property without permission, Ethan explained, but this time she's made it physical. She's blocking access to my garage. Jenkins reviewed the footage, asked a few questions, then approached Janice's front door. Ethan remained on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching the encounter through the porch camera feed. The conversation lasted just under 10 minutes. Janice was animated, pointing, gesturing, trying to frame herself as the victim. But Jenkins didn't look convinced. His body language stayed steady, arms relaxed, one hand resting near his notepad. When he returned, his tone was neutral but firm. She says there's been a misunderstanding about shared parking access in the neighborhood, he said. But after reviewing the footage and hearing your side, I've instructed her to move the vehicle immediately. She comply? Ethan asked. She's on her way, Jenkins replied. If she doesn't move it within 15 minutes, you're within your rights to have it towed. I've documented this for future reference. Ethan nodded. Appreciated, officer. 10 minutes later, the Lexus pulled away in a huff, tires squealing slightly as Janice accelerated around the corner. Ethan didn't flinch. He just watched. She hadn't gotten what she wanted. Not access, not control, not even a reaction. But she wasn't finished. That evening, a thick envelope appeared in Ethan's mailbox, hand-delivered. No postage. Inside was a printed agenda for an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for the following night. The first item listed in bold, discussion property access conflicts and resident non-cooperation. At the bottom, stamped with flourish, submitted by Vice President Janice Whitmore. Ethan read it twice, then smiled without warmth. This wasn't community service. It wasn't neighborly concern. It was theater, her final performance, and he'd be in the front row with receipts. The next evening, the community center's multipurpose room buzzed with the quiet tension of a courtroom. Folding chairs were arranged in rows. HOA board members sat behind a long plastic table, and a projector screen glowed softly in the background. Ethan arrived 15 minutes early, dressed plainly but with presence. Beside him was Tanya Abrams, his lawyer, calm and unshakable, with a leather binder tucked beneath one arm. Janice was already there, stationed at the center of the front table, clipboard in hand, her posture immaculate. She didn't look at Ethan. Not once residents trickled in. Some curious, some cautious. Others clearly irritated by being pulled away from dinner for an emergency meeting. But the room filled faster than expected. A lot of people, it seemed, had something to say. Tom Garvey stood up to start the meeting. Voice measured. Tonight's discussion concerns recent property access disputes and the conduct of board members in enforcing HOA guidelines. Janice cleared her throat dramatically and began with a prepared statement. She spoke of community harmony, of the danger of non-compliance, and of a resident who refused to cooperate with shared expectations. Her tone was polished, her words confident, but they echoed in the room like a play that had overstayed its run. When she finished, Tom turned to Ethan. "Mr. Clark, you've requested time to respond." Ethan stood slowly, opened his binder, and took a breath. Then methodically he began presenting each letter, each text, each dated photo of her vehicle in his garage and his driveway on his private property. He showed the security footage, shared his timeline, provided legal documents proving the garage conversion had been properly permitted, and then he stopped speaking because he didn't need to say anything more. The evidence spoke louder than Janice's smile ever had. Then something unexpected happened. A woman in the second row raised her hand. "I got one of those mailbox notices too," she said. "But when I walked down the street, I saw 3 others that hadn't been touched. They were all white households." A man near the back added, "She gave my son's car a warning sticker for being too loud, but the neighbor's sports car, nothing." One by one, residents began sharing their own stories. Selective enforcement, unannounced yard inspections, threats of fines over minor issues. Janice's mask cracked. Her eyes darted from face to face. She tried to interject, but the room had shifted. The momentum was no longer hers. Tom held up a hand. "Let's bring this to a vote." The motion removed Janice Whitmore from the HOA board, effective immediately. The vote passed overwhelmingly. No applause, just a collective exhale. Janice stood stiff, red-faced, and left the room without a word. Later that week, Tom Garvey was elected as the new board president. His first act, a commitment to transparency. Every enforcement notice would now require unanimous review. Residents would be allowed to attend meetings, submit feedback, and most importantly, expect fairness. The following Saturday, Ethan removed the internal lock from his garage, but he left the security cameras up. Not out of fear, not out of paranoia, just to remind himself that boundaries, when drawn clearly, can protect more than just property. They protect peace. Brookhaven. Ridge would never be perfect, but it had taken a step forward. And as Ethan stood in his garage that morning, a fresh breeze cutting through the open doorway, he thought, some boundaries are built to keep trouble out, not to shut neighbors out. Sometimes a simple boundary, a driveway, a garage, a locked door, becomes the only line standing between peace and violation. Ethan Clark didn't ask for a fight. He just wanted to be left alone, to work, to live, to exist without being watched, judged, or controlled. But when lines were crossed again and again, he stood his ground, not with anger, not with chaos, but with clarity, with dignity, and with evidence. And in the end, truth won. Not just for Ethan, but for every quiet neighbor who's ever been made to feel like they didn't belong in their own home. If this story moved, made you pause, or reminded you of someone you know, don't let it stop here. Subscribe for more stories like this, where everyday people push back in extraordinary ways. Like this video to support the voice behind the boundary, and leave a comment. Have you ever faced a neighbor who crossed the line? Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't happen in courtrooms or on headlines. They start at the edge of a driveway and end with a locked door. Finally respected.